Can people in need stop paying rent in a crisis?
Should people who can't pay get evicted?
How can Jewish law and language help us reframe how we think about rent?
We heard the story of a single mom in California.
Before COVID, her rent cost 3/4 of her income. Now she can't make payments. As unemployment rises, many people could be evicted.
The movement for rent cancellation captures a core intuition in Jewish sources.
A renter is like someone who's half enslaved and half free.
You can move anywhere, but the yoke of rent comes with you.
Workers rent in expensive places to gain access to higher wages.
If the jobs disappear, renters aren't getting what they paid for. Our tradition tries to protect renters from exploitation.
Tenants deserve the security of knowing that they won't be pushed out.
Our policies and communities can and must protect renters.
How much must we give up to save lives? Do our community centers, our businesses, our schools need to stay shut down? Can I go to my best friend's wedding? How much do we need to give up during a pandemic?
Jewish tradition values life over almost anything else.
We require all sorts of inconveniences
In order to keep ourselves and others safe.
But in daily life, we take all sorts of risks. Crossing the street, driving cars, even cooking can be dangerous.
In a pandemic, we have to think about mutual responsibility.
When I take a risk, it may put others in danger.
Our tradition requires leaders to set safe standards for reasonable risk.
Just like they must make roads safe for travelers.
Fear of an economic crisis may be a really good reason to consider taking a risk.
But not all economic loss is equal.
The rabbis liken poverty to death because poverty causes death.
Our leaders must care for those who are most vulnerable to the fatal disease of poverty and to COVID-19.
Is an employer required to pay an employee who can't work during a pandemic?
Can your boss ask you to risk your health in order to do your job?
We spoke with one woman who was laid off from her job at an airport.
Even with unemployment, she's struggling to support her family.
But she won't go back to work until she feels safe. Can ancient Jewish texts offer guidance on how to treat workers fairly when there is suddenly no work?
Mistreating a worker is a betrayal of humanity, history, and God.
And our texts also teach that we should not endanger our bodies.
But the rabbis understood that workers often take risks in order to sustain themselves.
Western ethics often focuses on an individual right to labor.
But Jewish sources drive us to think communally.
Reading these texts, you feel the sense of desperation that losing work can cause.
We are one body.
The decisions of one employee or employer
have consequences for us all.
So we've been hearing a lot about using contact tracing to contain COVID-19. But how exactly does contact tracing work?
If we track people using cell phone data without explicit permission, who will get that information and how will it be used?
These concerns are scariest for vulnerable people in our community, like undocumented immigrants.
How do we make wise choices that support both public health and civil liberties? The 1918 Spanish flu aroused fears of anti-Semitism among American Jewish immigrants.
Epidemic-fueled prejudice against immigrants can create a climate of fear that can itself inhibit public health.
Privacy is not a right bestowed on us from God. It is a necessary component of being created in God's own image.
Any contact tracing system must be built with great sensitivity.
Our history teaches that the best way to support both civil liberties and public health in a population at risk is to partner with them.
So let's learn and work together.